Hello, our viewers of Civic Space TV. With you today, I'm Angela Simwe, a lawyer and a human rights activist. I'll be your host today at Women's Show. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. With us today is an amazing philanthropist, mentor, role model. Sometimes, as the women's movement, we call her the president of the women's movement. And she's also the executive director of UWONET, which is also known as Uganda Women's Network. She's also one of those amazing women that were able to scoop and be the winners of the 2021 EU Human Rights Defenders Award. With us today, we have Rita Hope Aciro Lakor. You're welcome to Civic Space TV and Women's Show.
Thank you, Angela, and greetings to everybody out there.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and privilege hosting you today. Um, would like to know more about you, but also as we are in the Women's Month, which is March, where we celebrate women, would like to know more about what you do, the work you've done towards, because we know that you've been at the forefront of championing and also spearheading campaigns in regards to advocating for the rights of women and girls, mentoring young women and older women. We'd like to know more about you. So we're going to kick off the show with a few questions, and she'll be able to share details in regards to what she does. So Rita, first would like to know, who are you? Apart from what I've said, who is Rita? People see you on TVs out there, would like to know more about who you are.
My name is Rita Aciro, as you said, Hope Lakor, and I work with Uganda Women's Network. I must say I am a very independent and have been an independent child throughout my childhood. I'm also a very frank and honest person. I I also tend to be a bit reserved at times. For people who don't know me, they think I am very an extrovert, but I think I have a double personality.
Okay.
I am an introvert. While I love people, I also calculate my movements. I am a social development worker, and I work at Uganda Women's Network. I am a leadership and governance expert. I mastered in that, Masters of Science in Leadership and Governance. I also did some business and accounting.
Wow.
I also did some paralegal training. And yeah, as a child, I think I've been a very strong headed child. I knew what I wanted and I've gone for it.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Rita, for the detailed introduction. So as we proceed, we've seen you do a lot of work and you've been at the forefront of the women's movement. Would like to know, our viewers out there want to know, what is the women's movement in Uganda? When we say women's movement, is that an entity? What is it?
Okay, maybe before we talk about the women's movement, we need to understand a little bit what is a social movement.
Mm-hmm.
Because the women's movement is just a component of a social movement. So social movements are born out of situations of wanting to improve um, or fighting against an injustice. And the number of social movements we've seen around the world, with the most recent that everybody can easily relate with Black Lives Matter, that's a social movement. So at times when you talk about the women's movement in Uganda, people think it's something totally
Mm-hmm.
new. It's not. A social movement is basically people coming together, rising up against an injustice. We have seen social movements in South Africa against the apartheid. We have seen social movements in the years of Gandhi in India, against the British and wanting, the Indians to have some fair fair pay for work and also respect and dignity. There are a number of social movements that we've seen across the world. So when you talk about the social movement or a social movement, the women's movement is a social movement.
Wow.
This means basically women standing up, rising up to demand for better dignity, equality, and equity between men and women, boys and girls, and that's what the women's movement is all about. The
Wow.
unfortunate thing, though, when you talk about the women's movement here, people think you're talking about NGOs.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. There are so many women, individuals, and organizations, associations, or people organized differently, not necessarily non-government organizations, who are part of the women's movement. And the fact that they are standing up and rising up and saying no to injustice to women, they are part of the women's movement.
Thank you so much, Rita. So now that you've explained the women's movement, we'd like to know what has been the role of the women's movement in attaining gender equality.
Well, the women's movement in Uganda, if you start tracing it, the women's movement, you can trace it back up to 1905, 1906. That is when women's groups started coming together. One, they identified the injustices that was happening amongst women in education, in marriage, in family life generally. So the oldest women's organizing, we can trace it back to the Young Christian Women's Association that many people call YWCA. You can trace it back to the Catholic Women's Guild, the Muslims Women's Association, the Mothers Union. All that organizing was part of the women's movement. They were solving women's issues, challenging power at that time that was discriminating against women and girls. So the women's movement has grown and has evolved over time. Of course, the non-government organizations have become the catalyst of the women's movement, but we must never lose sight that the women's movement is not about the NGOs, it's about women organizing. And again, I should add, it's women and men. There are men who are also part of the women's movement who want to see better for women. So the women's movement has contributed immensely. One, by identifying injustice.
Mm-hmm.
Injustice in the social, economic, and political sphere. Two, by speaking up about these social, economic, and political injustices. Three, by offering practical support to people who need support in terms of social, psychological support, in terms of legal support, in terms of material support. And I'm saying this, I want all these issues relate back to even in the 1950s, 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, up to today, the women's movement has been alive. The women's movement has been very instrumental in policy alternative provision. This includes even the legal proposals. So where the women's movement has seen an injustice, they come up with an alternative and work with government and say, we would like to first see this, if there is an existing law, call for an amendment. If there is no law, introduce for a law to be passed. The women's movement has been instrumental in that. So the women's movement has set the pace for a gender responsive legal regime that supports women. The women's movement has also been very instrumental in setting the gender responsive policy regime. The women's movement has been very critical and important in ensuring government programming and all the other actors, development actors, civil society actors, are responsive to women and girls' needs. So ensuring that gender analysis, women's rights analysis in the policy, legal, and programmatic is very instrumental to provide alternatives to whoever the actor is. And this is really across the board, not necessarily with government only, including development partners. What type of funding are you giving? For what are you putting this funding? NGOs, what are your interventions? Where are you intervening? Why should you be intervening in particular areas? I must say that the women's movement has complemented government heavily, particularly in the social sector, around community awareness and conscientizing raising the civic competence for citizens to have the ability not only to know their rights but also their responsibilities. Because as a citizen, it's a double sword. You can't only claim rights, you need to know your responsibilities as a citizen. For example, you need to know that it is your responsibility as a parent to take care of your children and protect them. It is a responsibility that your children should go to school. It is a responsibility for a woman to ensure that she has good health, she has family planning and all that. So you educating, basically educating the citizens in order for them to be able to uptake what government is offering. The women's movement has played a critical role, and here I would like to say the NGOs have played a critical role in subsidizing government's responsibility around addressing challenges of SGBV, that is sexual and gender-based violence, providing information, coming up with alternative policies, ensuring that women actively participate in legislation, providing knowledge, legal aid, and sheltering for women. The women's movement has been very instrumental in raising women's competence around leadership. 20 years ago, we had only about 7% of women in parliament, 6 to 7% of women in parliament. Today, we are talking close to 44%, right?
Oh.
So that conscious building, support, encouraging women, giving them the skills and the abilities of leadership, squarely has been on the women's movement. Today we are launching one of the biggest women's centers, the Imara Center, by Forum for Women in Democracy. These women's organizations have contributed, gone to communities, educating women, sharing with them what the Constitution says, sharing with them about affirmative action, giving them technical skills and tips of how to become better leaders, advocacy skills, and that has contributed to women's leadership. The women's movement has been very instrumental in advocating for women's economic empowerment. Way back in 1997, 98, 99, and even 2000, when the Land Act was amended, and the 2013 land policy, the women's movement has consistently and constantly engaged with the land law in this country. In 1998, when the Land Act was passed, the women's movement ensured that women's land rights should be protected. As much as we lost on the consent clause, in 2004, when the Land Act was amended, there is a provision that actually says you cannot sell family land without the consent of the spouse. So these are contributions that we cannot take away from the women's movement. We have constantly ensured that women's health is on top of the agenda. We are cognizant of the fact that the health budget is unfortunately reducing, and even worse still, it's reducing at the time of COVID-19. But women's health has been constant on the women's rights agenda.
Thank you so much, Rita. I think that was so elaborate, and you've been able to cover most of the things that are to do with land rights. You've talked about the health, but then as we commemorate Women's Day on 8th March, Rita, I would like to know, how would you rate women's access to education, and financial services in Uganda today? Because we are in 2022, so how far do you think we've gone? How would we rate the access of education and also financial services? Because we've been in the COVID pandemic. We know very many women who are in the informal sector have lost their jobs. Some have survived, but those are very few. Would like to know, how would you rate that?
First of all, Angela, we need to appreciate the fact that growth and development is a process. We also need to appreciate the fact that there are drivers to growth, and then there are also drivers to the challenges that we face in all the areas, but specifically going to your two questions of education and financial services. You know, many times when people talk about growth, we are looking at the GDP and we are not looking at development.
True.
So growth might not necessarily translate into development. There's economic growth and there's economic development. Now, when you're measuring development, you measure it against the improvement of the life of the individual. As a country, we have grown. That goes without saying. We have grown as a country. The question is, have we developed?
Mm-hmm.
And can this development be traced to individuals? And if we can trace it to individuals, how fairly is it distributed across the country, across the genders, across the regions? So that is when you start looking at whether we are moving in the right direction. The same goes to education. We have grown. Our education levels have improved without, that goes without saying.
Mm-hmm.
It has improved. But when you are looking at the growth and the movement in the education sector, are we looking at this vis-a-vis the growth of the population as well? Because many times when people talk about growth, it's like we're talking about growth and we're in a static population. The population we have right now, we are told we're about 44, 45 million, is not the population we had 10 years ago. So when we are measuring this growth, are we measuring it with everything that goes with education? For example, the classrooms, the number of teacher to people ratio, is it the same? The distance that children have to go to school, has that reduced? So those indicators are crucial for our education. The enrollment, retention, and completion rates, is it improving? Or it is stagnant, or it is actually reducing? And of course, we're doing this interview at a very difficult time when we've seen so many of our girls drop out of school due to COVID. And I really, really hate saying that it's due to COVID. I don't think so. I don't believe so. Because COVID did not rape our girls. COVID did not molest our girls. It is people. So when people say it is due to COVID, at times I think we are misplacing the burden or the blame. We need to be looking out to for the people who actually abuse these girls.
That's true.
Unfortunately, again, these girls were abused during the time, most of them were abused during the time when many homes and families were locked down. So who were the abusers? These are the people who know them. These are the people who are within their communities. So in terms of education, yes, while we've taken 3 steps forward, it seems we're taking 5 steps backward.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important thing is, do we get to understand the key issues that make us take the backward steps? Because backward steps will always come, challenges will always arise. The most important thing is, are we very critical of those drivers so that we're able to nip the bud in, and also be able to foresee some of these challenges and be able to put in place mitigation strategies. Otherwise, we'll keep on drawing back, and unfortunately, many more of our girls are getting out of school. It is also true that we're seeing a number of girls breaking the glass ceiling. We're seeing more girls than ever before getting into STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. As much as the number is not growing vis-a-vis the population ratio, because women and girls are close to 52% of the population. But if you look at the different sectors of education, we are not near any with even 50%, especially when you go to the higher levels, university levels, or tertiary institutions. At entry, we are almost at 100 with boys and girls. But the higher you go, the less the girls drop. So we are seeing more women in the public spheres, but is that representative of the total population of women? So I think it is progress made, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But for us to do this work better, we need to know where the challenges are and ensure that those challenges are addressed at that point.
Wow. Thank you so much. And as Rita said, there's progress, but there's still a lot that needs to be done in regards to that. So Rita, you talked about embracing STEM. We realized that since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, it's true, women have embraced technology, and most of them have gone into things to do with digital rights and also access to internet. We've realized many women have even taken their businesses to go online. They are marketing and doing businesses online. What do you think are some of the challenges these women face in accessing internet and also digital rights in Uganda today?
Angela, you see, many times when we sit here in Kampala, we think the facilities we have access to are the same facilities the majority of women and girls have. That's the unfortunate thing. Majority of the women and girls don't have these facilities. We just saw with the online classes during the lockdown, and even now some classes are still online. But do you know how many of the children are not actually accessing that? And if you go further and say out of those children or girls, boys and girls, how many of those who are missing out are actually girls? So for me, yes, we are embracing the digital world, but we are so far behind as a country in terms of outreach. We are so much behind. First of all, even the gadgets for having a smartphone
It's
for
very
women in this,
expensive.
it's very, it's very expensive. Let alone that even buying it is expensive, maintaining it is expensive, the data and all that is all expensive. So for me, the digital, yes, it is a business, but it is for the minority, not for the majority. So the question should be, what do we need to do differently for the majority to get that and embrace the digital world? The other is also the aspect of the technicality. While it is an easy thing to use to access technology, do they have the skills? Do they have the ability to utilize it and utilize it properly for that matter? Because there's a lot that also goes in with the utilization of technology. So in terms of training, there's very limited training around that area for women and girls. And majority of our people, majority of the women and girls, for me, I speak for the majority, not the minority. Majority of our women are living in rural areas. So do we have the electricity? You go to some places, they can't even charge. Just charging a phone is a problem. Somebody has to pay 500 shillings, 1,000 shillings to charge a phone. And yet that is that can buy for you salt.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. But also we realized that UWONET, or Uganda Women's Network, was at the forefront of supporting and also standing in solidarity with Honorable Sylvia Rabogo when there's issues to do with online harassment. And during this pandemic, still there's been a lot of online harassment, which is basically a barrier to getting full and equal access to internet. So Rita, I would like to know how best can women be protected? Women have been abused online and nothing has been done about it. Unlike a few times when UWONET and other organizations step in to protect the rights of women online, what else do you think can be done to protect these women online?
Angela, I come from the school of thought that the online abuse is just a revelation of who we are as a society. It is not because of technology that all of a sudden people developed abuse syndrome or whatever. It is just a translation of who we are, online or offline. That is who we are. So the online aspect is probably they are now expanding that abuse to a larger community because the online communities, the numbers are big. But take that person who is imposing that abuse offline, the chances are 100 out of 100 that person is an abuser.
That's true.
So for me, using technology as abuse is they're just using it as a tool. But the abuse and dehumanizing, belittling women is a societal issue. It is a socialization issue that we need to get out of. But although that does not mean we cannot put laws in place, but laws alone will not help us. We need to reconstruct our mind of how we view women and girls as a community. That they deserve better, they're as good as boys and men, and they deserve respect. And that respect must be for the individual and the collective. So, yes, people will use technology, but for me, it's no excuse that that person who abuses online is 101% will abuse offline as well.
Wow. So anyone that abuses online can also abuse physical. That's what Rita is telling us. So thank you so much, Rita, for this informative conversation. It has been amazing. Hope you guys have learned a lot. Would like to know, what is your final word or message to women out there, to girls out there, that you inspire, mentor, and also those women that you've uplifted and those that look up to you? What is your message to them during this Women's Month?
Thank you very much, Angela and the team. To the women, girls, men, and boys there, I don't want to leave
Yes.
the men and boys out, because you're part of the solution to ensuring that your sisters, your mothers, your aunts, your cousins, all the female relatives in your home, your wives, live a better life. My call to you all is that progress comes with consistency. We need to be consistent. We shouldn't give up.
True.
We are what we are today because some women and some men some years ago fought for what we are enjoying today. Can we all join hands and make our contributions for a better world, for a planet 50-50, where men and women live a dignified life, where boys and girls have equal opportunities in the social, in the economic, and political spheres? It is your responsibility, it is my responsibility, and it's everyone's responsibility for us to have a better world. Thank you.
Welcome back to Civic Space TV Women's Show. And as I said, with us here today is Rita Hope Aciro Lakor, and I'm Angela Simwe. So Rita, what are some of the challenges in attaining gender equality and what can be done about it?
Angela and the viewers out there's no one straight answer to that. The challenges to attaining gender equality are enormous, and they are from the different spheres. But I must say one of the key drivers of the lack of attainment, or the slow pace at which we are moving in terms of attaining gender equality between men and women, is basically economic empowerment, but also that is reinforced with the negative social cultural norms. Economic empowerment is very important for us to bridge the gender gap. And for us to have economic empowerment, we must be looking at the three key factors of production. This include land, labor, and capital. So when we talk about these three issues, then you place men and women. If you place men and women in the areas of land, access, usability, ownership, and decision making, you ask yourself, do men and women actually have equal powers and opportunities to access, utilize, own, and make decisions on even what is harvested from that land? And if the answer is no, then you can see that is part of our challenge in terms of accessing gender equality. Right now, we have made some progress. Between 2002 2001, land ownership for women was at about 7%. Right now, we are talking over 25%, close to 30%. Say yes, there's some improvement in terms of statistics. But as I said earlier on, that 30% is against what? because the population has also increased. So you might find that 30% right now knocks off to the 7% we actually had over 20 years ago, because population has grown. So issues of land accessibility, usability, and decision making still largely lies with men. And yet, we also know that the people who utilize the land most are women, with over close to 70%. They utilize the land, but they can't make decisions on what is or what accrues from the utilization of that land. That means they are laborers, so to say. The other issue is the issue of labor. Women give the highest labor in this country, especially when it comes to the agricultural area. Question: do they have the skills and the abilities to uptake the type of technology we need right now? They don't. So the type of labor that women continue to offer on land is still what you'd call rudimentary methodologies. The yield that they get from the labor they put on the land is very minimal. So in terms of the skills, the abilities, the knowledge, accessibility of technology that we talked about, to make women's labor yield what is worth their labor is very minimum. So skilling women, educating women, value addition in the agricultural area is very important. But also labor in terms of education. What type of education are women getting for them to be able to get jobs that are worthy, getting income that can support them? When you look at women's leadership in different institutions, women are largely at the lower levels. And the lower levels come with lower pay. So very few women are at higher levels. And that does not reflect the larger population of women. The third issue is access to capital, access to credit. Do women and men have access to credit? And is it favorable to women? No, it's not. Why? You go back to the issue of land. Most of our money, the institutions that lend money, like banks, microfinance institutions, and even other lending companies, they want collateral. And many times this collateral is in land, titled land, or even land that it might not be titled, but somebody has control over. Majority of women don't have. So that means in terms of accessibility to capital, women are still lagging behind. So if women are lagging behind on these three key areas of factors of production: land, capital, and labor, then we cannot talk about economic empowerment that should be able to develop, one, the individual, but also contribute to national development. So economic empowerment is still a challenge. As much as we acknowledge the contribution or the programs that government is coming up with, or government has come up with, we've had a number of programs in this country, some of them very specific, like affirmative action programs. We had NUSAF, we had PRDP for the northern and part of eastern Uganda. We've had Operation Wealth Creation. We had Emmy Yoga, the Women's Fund, the Youth Fund, and now we have the Parish Development Model. These are all very welcome ideas. However, there is need, one, to educate the masses on how to access this money and how to utilize it so that they're able not only to pay back, but also multiply that money.
Wow.
We should educate people to avoid the consuming culture. As a country or as a people, we consume most of our money and we don't invest. How do we engage women to invest even in the little they have? So economic empowerment is still a very big challenge. Coupled with the challenge around the three factors of production: land, capital, and labor, is the issue of climate change. And this year, we are looking at climate change as a serious issue that affects women. One, it affects women because women are the biggest agricultural laborers. And agriculture depends on good weather. It depends on rain. But we're seeing climate change. Even the areas that were never dry are getting drier. The areas that used to receive some rain are getting less rain. Unfortunately, our people are cutting more trees and burning grass. So climate change is becoming a problem. And with that, we're going to see food insecurity if we haven't already not started realizing that. We are seeing a lot of labor of women, time spent in terms of unpaid care work. Women are spending more time looking for fuel, looking for water, instead of using that labor to do more productive work. So the climate change is a big driver to the disparity of economic empowerment between men and women. Climate change also has an effect on women in terms of health. Because where there is no water, women's health, sexual and reproductive health is at stake. We know that in this country, maternal mortality is on as one of the countries with the highest maternal mortality rate. As much as it has reduced from 345 to 336 out of every 100,000 live births, that's still very high. And partly this is contributed due to lack of water. Women are dying of sepsemia. And if we are not going to have enough water for women to ensure that they have healthy sexual and reproductive health rights, then it is going to affect even other areas of their life. The other key challenge of climate change is issues of violence against women. Sexual and gender-based violence, women are exposed because they are walking distances, and girls, to look for fuel. When I mean fuel, is the firewood that majority of our people use in the countryside to prepare food, or many other things. So that has exposed a number of women and girls to violence. So climate change is a big driver to poverty, and it's a big driver to gender inequality, something that we all need to be looking at seriously.
Wow. So Rita says we need to look at climate change. So Rita also talked about majority of women not having access to land, capital, and labor. But then now would think of women, but then the younger generation, I think it's worse. Then how do we get these young people, the young generation, to talk about gender equality, yet they also can access land, capital, and labor? How do we get them to speak about gender equality? How will they get to access and gender equality in Uganda today?
So it's true. One, land does not expand. At least that we were taught. Land does not expand, but the population is permanently growing. The boundaries of Uganda has never grown. The population is growing. Meaning that we need to become more creative in terms of increasing our industrialization. For a country to grow there, and some of the things that you need to do is, one, increasing and building your human capital. So the more educated people we have, the more skilled, actually education with skills, the more skilled people will have, there is a possibility that the less they will depend on land. So that is where we need to be looking at for the younger people. But for us to be able to do that, we must industrialize so that these people, the younger people, are not going back to look for land to till like the way we did or we are doing and our parents and our grandparents did, but the younger people are looking at industries. We need to be looking at urbanizing. Thank God now we have a number of cities coming up in this country so that people can live in urban areas and they don't have to live in rural areas where they depend totally on land. Living in urban areas meaningfully employed is very important. So how to deal with the younger people and the growing population? Did you know, Angela, that we are one of the most fertile countries, fertile in terms of fertility, not the land. We are one of the most fertile countries in the world. I think now we are at almost 6 children per woman, 5 point something, but you don't, with human beings, you don't put points. So we are about 6. We've reduced from 8. We've reduced to about 6. So our population is growing. That means our thinking needs to be different. Not everybody is going to depend on land. Land is not going to be enough for us. But for sure, if we industrialized, if we ensured that human capital is built for the needs that the country needs, to meet the needs of the country, if we also work on our population growth, population is good, but let people have children that they can afford.
Thank you so much, Rita. Rita, you've talked about population growth, and I think population growth also brings in a lot of unpaid care work. So that's when I would like to ask you, how do you think unpaid care work increases gender inequality?
So maybe we need to first tell our viewers what
What is unpaid care
care
work
work.
for starters?
Yes, yeah, just in simple terms, unpaid care work is the labor or the work one gives to family, community, society, in many times in the domestic sphere without any monetary value. And examples of unpaid care work is like taking care of home, ensuring the family and the children and everybody else have a clean home, they have clean clothes, they eat food, looking after the sick, looking after the elderly, looking after the children. All that is unpaid care work. And while it is a contribution and it contributes to well-being of society, nobody looks at that as work. People take it for granted. And yet, when somebody is doing that unpaid care work, it takes them away from a number of processes. You can't participate in the public sphere. If you are a school-going child, you miss school because you have to look after your sick mother or you have to look after the younger sibling. If you're a working woman, you might have to stay at home to either look after somebody or be in hospital. You know, so all that, if cumulatively, it takes time off women. But also because it's unpaid care and it's been taken for granted, women are overworked. You wake up at 6, you're making breakfast, you're cooking, you're going to get firewood, you come back, you're washing clothes, you're fixing. So, and you ask somebody, they'll tell you, they don't work. My wife doesn't work. She stays at home. So it's considered unpaid care. So going to your question, how does that contribute to gender inequality? One, because you are doing work that has no monetary value. The person who does work that has monetary value will see their work as more important and yours inferior. That's already gender inequality. They do not see your contribution because it has no monetary value. If they bought a car and built a house, they will tell you you didn't contribute to it. And therefore, you can't make a decision over that property. That is already gender inequality. The time spent by women on unpaid care work and the time spent by whoever goes to office or an office, you're spending almost double the time. That's already gender inequality. The accessibility to decision-making spaces, that's already, women cannot go to make decisions because they're always in the domestic sphere. They are not having access in the public sphere. That is already gender inequality. And for that reason, we need to appreciate, we're not saying that work at home can't be done by women, but we're saying, can this work be fair enough for everybody? Can it be redistributed? Can it be recognized? And you know, people have been having this misconception that women want to be paid for doing work at home. No, that's not it. We are saying let it be redistributed so that the woman or the girl child also has some time for leisure. When you have a girl and a boy, you find the girl is washing in the kitchen, the boy is reading his books. Why don't they wash together so that they have time to revise equally? So that is what we're talking about. And there are a number of avenues through which also government can contribute by recognizing redistribution and also reducing it. Putting in place public services, social services that reduce, like child centers, where if a woman is a working mother, she can have a place to keep the child. The hospitals working more efficiently. A woman does not have to spend a whole day or days looking after the sick or even staying in the hospital because the facilities are, efficient. She can still do that, but ensure that she goes back to do what she's doing. Can we ensure that the roads, for example, now we have a number of very good roads, and thanks to government for that, but we still have the inner roads that lead to, the village paths that need to be made better, so that is reduced. It also reduces on unpaid care work.
Thank you so much, Rita. And as you heard, she said we need to recognize, redistribute, and also reduce unpaid care work. So, Rita, our viewers on Civic Space TV might be interested because this is it has been a powerful conversation and you've given us amazing ideas. What if someone wants to meet Rita or wants to join and be a member of Uganda Women's Network? Do I have to have a big organization? Do you only allow organizations? Anyway, as an individual, if someone, one of our viewers, wants to be part of UWONET, what can they do? You had also talked about issues to do with teenage pregnancy. I would like to know, what is UWONET? Is there any work you're doing around that, ending teenage pregnancy, and also to do with gender-based violence survivors? Are you supporting them? Those are the two things that we'd like to know.
You see, Angela, when we started this show, we talked about the women's movement. And we clearly distinguished the women's movement from organizations. We also talked about what the women's movement is about. So going to your question, can somebody join and become a member of UWONET? Yes, they can. We are a national women's rights organization, and our membership are women's rights organizations at the national level. But I must caution, though, that we should not NGOize, if there's any word like that, the women's movement. The women's movement is not an NGO. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you can still be part of the women's movement so long as you're working for a better world for women. Do not hesitate to be part of the women's movement because you do not belong to any women's rights organization. I really want to emphasize that.
Thank you so much.
And our work is around policy advocacy, around girl-child education, women's health. We engage with government and all the other stakeholders in law, policy, programs, practice, and change of attitude.
Wow. So does that mean you have any support to gender-based violence survivors?
Yes, we do. And that is, we have shelters, and there are a number of shelters run by women's rights organizations. But for UWONET, the reason why we run those shelters is really for us to document real stories, to be able to advocate in terms of policy, access to justice, because we want those real stories. So for us, it is a means to getting into what we want in terms of advocacy.
Thank you so much, Rita Hope Aciro Lakor. This has been amazing. Thank you so much, our viewers. Remember, this show, Women's Show, airs every Tuesday. And we also have several other shows on Civic Space TV on Monday. Remember to watch Community Show. We have Women's Show on Tuesday. We have several other shows, Youth Roundtable on Wednesday. And we have inter-university debates on Thursday. We have other shows that we'll be having, like Women at the Frontline on Saturday, Diaspora Show on Sunday, and we'll be bringing you very more interesting things and also amazing and phenomenal people. Thank you so much, Rita Aciro. It has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and I wish all the women a happy Women's Day. Please go out there and work. Make yourselves economically independent.
Wow, thank you.